Hi folks, in this video we're going to talk about what are pedigrees and why we would use them in biology. Let's get started right away. A pedigree, what you see right here on the right side, is just a graphical representation of how a trait is passed down from parents to offspring. It's essentially a family tree, but in that family tree we have more information about who has the trait in question and who does not have the trait in question. Now, genetic counselors would actually use this information very frequently and would find out about your family history and make this chart to analyze how likely the next generation is to have a particular trait, or how likely it is for someone to marry into a trait of some kind, something like that. That's why we would use those. So there are a couple of symbols that we'll go over in a pedigree, and I invite you to get out 4.2, the pedigree activity for me here, because we're going to fill in all these different symbols on the very top of the page. Okay. To start off, we have some pretty basic shapes to deal with. One, we have squares that signify males. We have circles to signify females. In the case of an individual that is affected by something, let's say they have a phenotype that is attributed, or let's say they have blue eyes instead of red, something like that. Whatever trait we're following, this trait will be filled in for the individuals that are affected by the trait or show that trait, and it will not be filled in for the individuals that don't. Same goes for the females, filled in for any affected females, not filled in for any normal females. And if we know that this particular thing is not evident but is carried in a generation, we may fill it in 50-50. So as you can see that this trait may be recessive, it may be in the genetics of that person, but might not be actually the phenotype that is shown. Additionally, we have some lines to worry about. The lines between two would be marriage between two individuals, or at least reproduction between two individuals. The line going down from that spot would be the children of that marriage or relationship. There is a possibility for twins to pop up. That would be a angled, arrowed line just like this. And identical twins will have an automatic match between them, so we'll add that line between them. Anyone who is deceased, we can go ahead and slash through with that line right there to show that their genetic line will not continue to flow. If we are interested in an individual, I will always put a specific arrow up on the top left of that square. So if we were interested in one male, this would be how I would point out, hey, tell me about this guy. And then the rest of it in the pedigree will be based on generations and numbers. So, for example, if I ask you about excuse me, a person in generation 3, we would find these Roman numerals 1, 2, 3 right there, and you would see the whole line of that particular generation. Then we can actually go through the birth order of those offspring by 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. So here is an example of a pedigree. You can see that there are 4 generations, 1, 2, 3, 4. And in this situation, we have an individual that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Anytime the number is lower, that is the individual that is born first. So the very first born was number 1. They married number 2 over here. The second born was number 3, and they married number 4. The third born was number 5, and they married number 6. Hopefully that makes sense for you here. Now, exactly how many generations are there here? Looks like there are 4 generations. Let me get my pen here. 4 generations. Wow, that was terrible. 4. That's better. How is individual 1, 1 related to individual 3, 4? So here is first generation individual number 1. And here is third generation individual number 4. Looks like that would be not their parents, those are the parents right there, but the grandparents, G-parents. And you'll have to excuse me for my bad handwriting with the pen here, but I'm doing the best I can. Does individual 3, 3, or generation 3, individual 3, have an affected phenotype? Let's take a look. Here's generation number 3. Their square is blank, so they are not affected by that phenotype that we're looking for. No. If you have questions, let me know about this particular gene or this particular pedigree, and we're moving on. Now, in part 2 of the pedigree activity sheet 4.2, it's going to ask you to interpret a pedigree, which means that we need to figure out exactly if this trait is dominant or recessive based on the individuals that have it in this particular sequence. Now, if the disorder is dominant, meaning that it shows up in the phenotype no matter what, then one of the parents must have the disorder. Take a look at this one right here. We can see that the individuals here both are afflicted with this disorder or have this phenotype, and they have one child who has it and one child who doesn't. In order for this child to have it, there has to be, if it's dominant, has to be one parent that has it, because here we would have a heterozygous individual, capital letter, lowercase letter, and here they would have a capital or lowercase letter as well. That's the only way we could have that double lowercase right here for a recessive individual that does not have the disorder. Now, if the disorder is recessive, then neither parent has to have the disorder because they can't be heterozygous, meaning that if I assume that this person right here has 2 lowercase letters and this person right here has 2 lowercase letters, well, then they would automatically pass down this to the next generation. If I assume that these two have both capital letters, then these individuals would automatically have the same genes. But in this situation, these individuals have a capital letter and lowercase letter and have split it kind of 50-50 between them. This person probably got a heterozygous combination, but in order to have this autosomal recessive, we have 2 lowercase letters passed down by the 2 recessives, one from each of the parents. So, taking a look at these particular examples here, and this is different than the example in your assignment, but you should be able to follow along regardless. We can see that there is a couple of different trees here, a couple of different pedigrees. I'll split it down the middle here. And here I see that an individual in the grandparent generation here has it, and the individual over here does not. And they have children that do have that affliction, which means that likely this is going to be a dominant one. We'll confirm that in a moment here, but this is likely a dominant situation because an individual who does not have it is going to lead towards someone who does not have it as well. Whereas over here, we have 2 individuals who do not have that same trait, but they still had someone who has the trait. So that would be like, let's say if we had letter A for our genotypes, notice that the lowercase letters can still be passed on, leading to an lowercase a in that generation, regardless of what happens over here, whether it's capital A, or capital A, lowercase a. Getting ahead of myself there. We can have an individual who has the lowercase letters. Meanwhile, over here, if we assume that this one is a dominant one, whether it's this or that, then this person would have to have a recessive allele. And here they would pass down a dominant allele. A dominant allele. And it just turns out that they have that homozygous, or the heterozygous one over there, so one person was not afflicted. So this one is dominant. This one is recessive. Let's do another example just like that. Here's an example for widow's peak. Widow's peak is a dominant trait, while a straight hairline is a recessive trait. Those with straight hairline are shaded in. The affliction is the lowercase letter. So that means that automatically we can assume that this individual here, because it's a recessive trait, a straight hairline, we can give them automatically lowercase letters. That would be HH. We'll use the symbols H and lowercase h to label the genotypes of each individual. So here we know that the shaded regions have to be lowercase letters. Same with this one. You can actually put them on the lines below. I didn't feel like it today. Same deal though. Okay. Now we need to figure out the combination for these individuals. So it could be capital H, capital H, or capital H, lowercase h. Let's see. If this individual has two lowercase letters, then that means they have to get one from mom and one from dad, or one from dad, one from mom, really. And if we used these two capital letters, we couldn't pass down one of them to this individual because they are straight hairline. So it couldn't be the capital letter one. It couldn't be the homozygous one, I should say. It has to be the heterozygous one. Same goes for this one individual here. Because again, if they were homozygous dominant, then that means that they would pass down a capital H no matter what. And we can see three different individuals that have the lowercase h's. Okay? So we can assume that this one is also heterozygous. And I want to talk specifically about this individual here really quickly and write down just theirs right here. So lowercase h, lowercase h. We know that this has to have at least one capital letter. We don't know what the other one is. And this one has to have one capital letter as well. Well, based on mom having a straight hairline, a recessive allele has to come down to the child here, which means that the only way that we could get the capital letter was from the father. We don't know, however, if this father has a capital H, or if it's capital H, lowercase h, because either one of these could supply the capital letter down to the child. So at this point, we have determined all we can about this family and their straight and widow's peaked hairlines. And obviously, pedigrees don't have to be small like that. They can be big like this family here. I will run through this in a second or two so you can check your answers. But I want to see how far you can get on your own with this particular example here. You can do it in your mind here, or you can think about it and write it down on paper if you like. But in this case, brachydactyly is a condition in which the fingers are abnormally short. The last two joints of the middle finger are shortened, and the other four fingers, the last two joints, are fused into one tiny little finger. Determine whether brachydactyly is dominant or recessive, and determine the genotype for each individual in this pedigree using B for our allele, capital B for dominant, lowercase b for recessive. I'm going to pause my video now. You should pause your video too. I'll pause it in the Edpuzzle for sure. Go ahead and give this a shot and see how far you get. So here I have filled out all the genotypes for our pedigree here. It actually was pretty simple once you got the hang of it. Looking at the number of afflicted individuals, I assumed that it was going to be a dominant trait, especially knowing that an individual here that was afflicted passed it down to the generations even with someone who wasn't afflicted, which means the non-affliction is going to be the recessive trait. So looking at all these different individuals, looks like pretty much everyone who's been afflicted is a heterozygote, which means that they have the chance to pass down this to the next generation, but not necessarily a certainty, because they can always marry someone like this individual here, marry someone who is a homozygous recessive, and therefore pass down the two recessive alleles to the next generation. You could also pass down the heterozygote again, but that happened a couple times across the board here. The only person that we didn't know the entire genotype for, based on this, is great-great-granddaddy up here, because they don't have any more information for us about whether or not they pass down a capital or lowercase. I'm going to assume it was probably a homozygote individual so that we can have, well actually, no, we can't assume that because this individual has a lowercase b, which means it has to be a heterozygote as well. Check myself before I wreck myself. That's it for this video. Keep on with 4.2 right there. You'll have your own pedigree to fill out down here, and I'm happy to help with all you need. Good luck. Be smart.